Darius Cole was 38 years old, and for 90 years, he had been the man his wife described to anyone who would listen as the easiest thing in the world to manage. He drove a 10-year-old Silverado with a cracked dashboard mount and wore the same khaki jacket to every Chamber of Commerce meeting he had attended in the last 6 years. Vivienne's family called him Steady Darius at holiday dinners, and said it with the particular warmth of people who meant it as a ceiling rather than a compliment. He thanked them and ate his food, and said very little, which they took as confirmation of everything they had decided about him. He was merging onto I-55 North outside of Jackson when he called home from the truck. Vivienne picked up. He heard a click, and then a pause, and then her voice came back, but aimed somewhere else, easier, the way a voice becomes when the person believes they are no longer being heard. She had dialed her sister Claudette on a second line. She had not ended his. "He'll sign anything I put in front of him," she said. "He always has. The papers just need his name, and it's done." The $218,000 cleared to the Hargrove account this morning. What Vivienne did not know, what she had never once thought to ask in 9 years of marriage, was that Darius had a professional habit he had developed over 12 years of freight brokerage. He never ended a call until he was certain the other party had disconnected. His grandmother had explained the reason once, and he had carried it like a hand tool ever since. He also had a call recording application running on his phone. He used it on every business call he made from that truck. He sat in a rest stop outside of Raymond for 22 minutes with the phone in his hand and the recording still active. What came next would cost Vivienne considerably more than his signature. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The drive down to Jackson had started before sunrise, the way most of Darius's days started, with a thermos of black coffee, a clipboard of manifests on the passenger seat, and the city of Memphis fading in the rearview mirror before the neighborhood fully woke. He had built the reading corner himself, floor-to-ceiling shelves in the study of the main bedroom, framed and fitted over a long weekend 3 winters ago, trimmed to match the original millwork, sanded and stained twice until the color was right. Vivienne had walked in when he finished and said it looked nice. She had not asked how long it took. He had put 40 hours into it, which was roughly the same amount of time he had spent that same month reviewing the carrier contracts that would become Cole Transport Group's third major distribution agreement. Neither fact had seemed worth mentioning. His grandmother, My Frances, had told him when he was 11 years old, and watching her sort through a stack of envelopes at the kitchen table, cross-referencing his grandfather's accounts with a patience that asked nothing of the numbers but accuracy. Paper don't lie, baby. People lie. Paper Hoost sits there and tells the truth. He had stored that away somewhere permanent and drawn on it his entire professional life. Darius had spent 12 years in freight logistics, starting as a dispatcher for a regional carrier right out of the University of Memphis, working through operations management, learning every layer of the supply chain from the moment a shipment was tendered to the moment it was signed for at the dock. 7 years ago, he and a former employer named Calvin Hughes had formed Cole Transport Group, a regional freight brokerage operating out of a warehouse facility off Democrat Road in Memphis, managing contracts with 4 distribution centers across the Mid-South. The firm had billed $2.1 million the prior fiscal year. Calvin had retired out of his share 18 months before, at a figure they had both agreed was fair. Darius now held the whole thing. He drove the Silverado because it was practical and because he had never needed a vehicle to announce something his business filings had already documented clearly. It had spent 12 years moving freight across the Mid-South and logging every pickup and filing every delivery confirmation and building a company from a dispatcher's desk to a 7-figure operation, and Vivienne had watched all of it from across a kitchen table and read none of it, because she had decided in the first year of their marriage what kind of man Darius was. And she had not found a reason to look again. He had met her at a Memphis Chamber of Commerce mixer 8 years before they married. She worked in commercial real estate marketing, was poised and well-connected, and made him laugh 3 times in the first hour of conversation, which was the only early metric he had ever trusted. They moved carefully into something real, bought the Colonial in Germantown, and built a life that was, in its early years, genuinely good. She had her industry contacts. He had his roots. He never needed her to understand what he was building. He only needed what he built to be sound. The habit of recording business calls had begun the year he launched Coal Transport, a broker dispute, a forged proof of delivery, a Carrier who swore under oath that a conversation had never taken place. His uncle Royce, a semi-retired contracts attorney who had spent 3 decades in transportation law, had told him afterward, without ceremony, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Every call Darius made from that truck had carried an audio record from that point forward. It was as routine to him as checking the fuel gauge. And noticed the first sign of trouble, the way he noticed most things, not as an event, but as a quiet accumulation of details he could not yet read as a pattern, but set aside regardless. Vivienne had a new phone in the spring. She mentioned it as a work upgrade. I saw it twice on the kitchen counter with the screen face up. Not her work number in the notification preview, but a name he did not recognize displayed without context. He filed it away without comment. He had also noticed, in the weeks after the new phone appeared, that Vivienne kept later hours on certain evenings without explanation. That she mentioned a professional contact named Preston, with a particular ease that invited no follow-up questions, and that when she laughed at something on her phone, she tilted the screen away as a matter of routine. He noted each thing the way he noted a shipment that had left without a proper manifest, without alarm, but with the understanding that something had moved without documentation and would need to be accounted for eventually. It was not yet measuring. He was only watching. The call to the house from I-55 had been routine. He was checking whether she needed anything before he came through, a Tuesday evening errand he had made dozens of times. She had answered on the second ring, said, "Hey," and then there had been a pause and a click, and her voice came back different, easier, unheld, aimed somewhere else. She had opened a second line. She had not closed his. He did not speak. He held the phone to his ear and sat in the left lane at 70 miles an hour and listened. She was speaking to her sister Claudette. He could tell from the rhythm and shorthand of the conversation, from Claudette's responses filtering through faintly, from the loose ease of two people who had been discussing something for long enough, that the urgency had settled into routine. "I'm not worried about it," Vivienne said. "You know how he is. He'll sign anything I put in front of him. He always has." He merged right, gradually, without urgency. Claudette sighed something. Then Vivienne again. It already cleared. The $218 million cleared to the Hargrove account this morning. I moved it in 4 transfers over 6 weeks. By the time anyone flags it as dissipation, we'll already be in mediation, and I'll frame it as emergency household expenses. I saw an exit for a rest stop a quarter mile ahead. He put on his signal. Preston already has the paperwork drafted. We file Monday. He signs by Friday and the house goes into settlement proceedings before he knows enough to push back. Claudette sighed something he could not fully make out. Vivienne gave a short, dismissive laugh, a sound he did not recognize from the laugh she had in conversation with him. "He doesn't have an attorney," she said. "He doesn't know he needs one." He pulled into the rest stop. He parked at the far end of the lot, away from the truck stop entrance, and looked at the phone on the dash. His hands didn't shake. The recording application was running. He could see the waveform moving in the audio monitor. Her voice, Claudette's voice, the quiet background of his own truck. He did not stop it. He listened to the rest of the conversation. Vivienne spoke for another 11 minutes. In that time, he learned that Preston Garland, the name from the notification preview he had filed away in the spring, was an architect and developer who had been introduced to Vivienne through her commercial real estate network. He also learned from a comment Vivienne made about the Democrat Road property that Garland's interest in this situation was not purely personal. The warehouse that housed Coal Transport Group sat on a parcel adjacent to a mixed-use development Garland had been attempting to finance for over 2 years. The financing had stalled. He needed the land footprint. He needed Darius out of the property and out of the marriage simultaneously. He noted this the way he noted the discrepancy in a manifest, without excitement, without anger, as a fact requiring entry into the record. When Vivienne finally ended the call, he sat in the rest stop for 11 more minutes in complete silence. 12 years of logistics had taught him one unbreakable rule. You documented before you acted. You never filed a freight claim without a proof of loss. Documentación was not administrative formality. It was the instrument through which truth became undeniable. He saved the recording to his firm's cloud archive. He created a new folder. He named it Vivienne. Then he called his uncle Royce, pulled back onto the interstate, and drove north toward Memphis. Some things, Once found, could not be unfound. The only question that remained was what you did with what you had. Royce Coleman was 64 years old and had practiced contracts and transportation law in Memphis for 31 years before cutting his caseload in half and spending the recovered hours fishing and reading and answering calls from people he trusted. He was Darius's mother's older brother, a man who had once stopped a federal mediator mid-sentence to correct a decimal point, and who had been proven exactly right. And he was the person Darius called when precision was required. He called from the driveway of the Hermantown house, in the truck with the engine off. He said, "I need an hour, and I need you to know it's serious." Royce said, "Come now." They sat at his kitchen table that evening with a printed transcript of the call. Darius kept a portable printer in the truck for delivery documentation, alongside the call record showing duration, timestamp, and Darius's verified GPS location at the time of recording. Royce read it twice. He tapped the timestamp. "You were a party to this call," he said. "Tennessee is a one-party consent state. This is clean." "I know," Darius said. "I want to know what I'm exposed to, what they were counting on." Royce set the pages down. "They were counting on you not having an attorney, on you not knowing what the firm was worth or how it was structured." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you have a family law attorney?" "Not yet. You will by Thursday. Her name is Phyllis Durant." Real power operated in quiet rooms, and it arrived early. Phyllis Durant had a downtown office, a calibrated manner, and a very particular patience for cases in which one party had begun moving assets before filing papers. She reviewed the transcript and the transfer records from the joint investment account, which Darius had accessed using his own credentials within 24 hours of the rest stop, and she read both documents with the unhurried attention of someone building a structure she intended to last. 4 transfers over 6 weeks, she said, not looking up from the bank records, each one below the threshold for automatic review. That's deliberate structuring. She set the page down. This is textbook dissipation of marital assets. We file for a freeze order immediately. The $218,000 is stopped where it sits. She walked him through the asset picture. Cole Transport Group, a Sole member LLC, established 7 years ago, 14 months before the marriage certificate, was legally separate from any marital asset under Tennessee code. The Hermantown house had been purchased in his name, with his down payment on a mortgage he had serviced exclusively from his personal accounts. There was a joint checking account, and there had been a joint investment portfolio. The portfolio was now short $218,000. Everything else belonged, cleanly and documentably, to him. "What does she believe you earn?" Phyllis asked. Darius considered this. "She's seen a salary figure from the operations director role I held before the buyout. Around $82,000. She has never asked a direct question about the firm." Phyllis looked at him steadily. "The firm's revenue last year, $2.1 million. She wrote something in the margin of her legal pad and continued. What Vivian had never thought to verify in 9 years of marriage was whether the man she had described as easy to manage had been managing anything at all. Over the following 2 weeks, Darius and Phyllis assembled the record with the methodical patience of people building something intended to hold weight. They documented the transfer trail with bank-level precision and filed the freeze order, which was granted within 48 hours. They pulled Preston Garland's Development LLC filings and found the financing gap, nearly $900,000 on the Democrat Road adjacent project, open for 22 months, requiring the acquisition of the coal transport parcel to close. They cross-referenced the timeline. Garland had been introduced to Vivienne through a shared commercial real estate contact approximately 14 months before the rest stop call. The scheme had 2 parts: remove Darius from the marriage and from the property simultaneously, using the divorce proceedings to force an asset sale. It was the kind of plan that looked plausible on a spreadsheet and came apart entirely the moment it was documented by the other side. What Garland had not accounted for, could not have known to account for, because Vivienne would not have known to tell him, was that Darius had been receiving zoning notification alerts for the Democrat Road corridor for over a year as a registered neighboring property owner, A had noted Garland's development application 14 months ago, filed a written objection through Coal Transport's registered address, and been entered into the public planning record by name. His interest in that land was already documented. It had been documented before Garland had ever introduced himself to Vivienne at a mixer. Preparación was the work. Everything else was delivery. Through all of this, Darius came home to Hermantown each evening and had dinner with his wife. He asked about her day. He watched the evening news. On the second Wednesday after the rest stop call, Vivienne set a manila envelope beside his coffee mug with the easy confidence of a woman who believed the outcome was already settled. Just some beneficiary update forms for the household policy. Nothing complicated. He picked up the envelope. He looked at it. "I'll read through it tonight," he said, and set it back on the counter. He went upstairs, showered, and went to bed. She was performing for an audience that existed only in her own head. He had noticed, across those dinners, that she seemed more relaxed than she had been in months, more present, more talkative, easier in the way of someone who believes a plan is nearing its conclusion. She asked him once whether he thought they might take a short trip before the end of the year. "Somewhere warm," she said. "The Gulf Coast." "Maybe." He said that sounded like something worth considering. She smiled and went back to her phone. He washed his own dish. He thanked her for the meal, the same as always. He photographed the envelope the following morning. Exterior, return address, the name of the law firm printed where an insurance company should have been, and sent the image to Phyllis. She replied, "Good. Don't sign anything. We're ready." The conference room at Phyllis Durant's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Main Street, and it looked out across the city on a clear October morning. Darius arrived 20 minutes early and sat with his coffee and went through the sequence of what was about to happen the way he reviewed a delivery manifest, each element in order. Each handoff point confirmed. Vivienne arrived with her attorney, a man named Raymond Sloan, who carried his portfolio as though it contained a conclusion someone had already agreed to. Vivienne looked at Darius directly when she entered, the first direct look in weeks. Anne saw something register in her expression when she noticed Phyllis was already seated and that documents were already on the table. She sat down. She set her own envelope beside her. Raymond Sloan opened. Vivienne was seeking equitable distribution of the marital home, division of joint investment assets, and spousal support calculated against Darius's documented income. He said his pen down with the confident finality of a man presenting a figure he expected to be accepted. Phyllis opened her folder, the first document, the call recording transcript. 23 pages, time-stamped, speaker identified. The metadata confirmed Darius Cole as a party to the call at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in August. Legally obtained under Tennessee one-party consent statute. Raymond Sloaney read the first page. He turned to the second without expression. He turned to the third. The second document, the transfer records from the joint investment account. 4 structured transfers over 6 weeks, totaling $218,000, moved to an account held by Patricia Hargrove at a bank where Darius was not an account holder and had never been contacted. The freeze order, already in effect, was appended. The third, Coal Transport Group's operating agreement. Member, Darius A. Cole, established 7 years ago. Revenue, prior fiscal year, $2.1 million. Legal separation from any marital asset, established and filed before the marriage certificate was issued. The fourth, the Metro Memphis Planning Commission zoning record, Preston Garland's development application for the Democrat Road adjacent parcel. Darius Cole's registered written objection, filed on Coal Transport letterhead, dated 14 months prior. His name in the public record. His interest in that land, documented before Garland had ever introduced himself to anyone. Phyllis set the last page down and let the room sit with what was on the table. "Mr. Sloan," she said, "your client does not have an equitable distribution to negotiate. She has a response to a dissipation finding, a disclosure of actual marital assets, and a recorded conversation that speaks to both." She folded her hands. "We are prepared to be reasonable. But we are going to be accurate first." Raymond Sloaney had stopped writing. Vivienne turned to Darius. It was the turn of someone looking for a familiar opening, a hesitation, a softening, something she had used before and expected to find again. The money was a family loan, she said, to help my mother. You knew about it. He looked at her without anger and without heat. I didn't, he said. You don't remember. Vivienne. Her name came out the way he said, a figure that needed correcting. Plain, without drama. I document everything. Raymond Sloan closed his portfolio. Darius stood, buttoned his jacket, and nodded to Phyllis. He did not look back at the room. He walked to the elevator, rode it to the lobby, and came out into the October morning. His truck was a block north. A drove to the warehouse, checked in on 2 pending carrier contracts, reviewed a staffing request his operations manager had submitted, and had lunch at his desk. The signature she had been counting on was the one he had never given her. He had always known what he was signing. He had simply been waiting for the right moment to prove it. 9 months after that morning in Phyllis Durant's conference room, the divorce was finalized and the record was closed. The freeze on the Hargrove account had held through the full proceedings. The court ruled the $218,000 as dissipated marital assets and ordered restitution to the estate for equitable calculation. Vivienne's attorney had made 2 attempts to reclassify the transfers. The call recording, admitted without redaction, ended both of them. Patricia Hargrove returned the money by certified wire in 3 installments. Preston Garland's development project did not survive the year. The financing structure he had built around the anticipated acquisition of the Democrat Road parcel collapsed when the acquisition failed, and his primary lender called the note in the first quarter of the following year. His LLC filed a voluntary dissolution in the spring. Darius read the entry in a weekly business filing digest he received as a registered property owner in the district. He noted it and moved on. Vivienne moved into a rental in Midtown in the fall. The commercial real estate marketing firm where she worked went through a restructuring 6 months after the settlement, and her position was among those eliminated. Claudette, Darius learned through a mutual acquaintance, had not spoken to her sister since the transcript of the conversation had been entered into the court record. The call Vivienne had believed was private turned out to be the most documented thing she had ever said. Darius moved to a property in East Memphis had purchased 2 years earlier and spent a quiet winter renovating. New kitchen, refinished hardwoods. A back porch he designed and built himself from a sketch he had made on a Lego pad. It was the kind of work he did in the hours between when most people went to sleep and when the sun came up. And he did it without haste and without an audience, which was the only way he had ever known how to build anything that lasted. Cole Transport signed its largest single contract in the spring, a distribution agreement with a regional grocery chain, adding 3 new carrier lanes out of the Democrat Road facility. He called Calvin to tell him. Calvin said he had never doubted it for a day. There was a woman named Renee, a freight compliance auditor at a partner firm he had worked alongside for 2 years, who had begun meeting him for coffee on Saturday mornings at a place near the East Memphis house. She asked sharp questions about the business, and easy ones about other things, and she did not need him to be louder than he was or different in any way he couldn't account for. They moved at the pace of people who had each learned that careful and slow were not the same as uncertain. On a February morning that came in cold and clean, he sat at the kitchen table he had built himself in the East Memphis house, the coffee hot, the city just beginning to stir beyond the window. He thought about what Mae Francis had told him when he was 11 years old, that paper didn't lie, that it simply sat there and told the truth, and he thought she had been right about that, as she had been right about most things. The record had told the truth. It had needed nothing from him but patience and proper filing. He had signed nothing he did not mean to sign. Everything he had built was still standing. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.